And it's a surprise UFC debut, and it might seem like a weird bit of matchmaking coming up this weekend. The Bonecrusher Marc Diakiese, 7-7 since he debuted years ago at UFC 204. Diakiese looking to take on the newcomer out of Nova União, Kaue Fernandes. And Matt, UFC fans, they might already recognize Fernandez, or maybe him and his brother, Kaue Fernandes, who unfortunately lost a fight earlier on this year. Probably would have been able to punch his ticket to the UFC or Contender Series, but we do have one of the Fernandez brothers coming up, riding a 2-fight win streak over with the LFA. And if you don't know about Fernandez, let me cook for a little bit, because going back and watching the tape, it was a lot of fun, and you can find quite a bit of it out there. Because for Fernandez, pretty easy to find the fight tape. For Eduarda Moura, I don't know. I mean, I could find a couple of them. I'll be completely honest with everybody.
More difficult than Fernandez.
And then with Vitor Hugo, you can find a little bit. But when you look at a guy like Fernandez training out of such a mega gym in Nova União, you always see Dede Pederneiras in the corner of a lot of those fighters. Jose Aldo kind of at the top of the marquee. Then you have fighters that end up becoming coaches. I'm thinking like UFC 1, 2, and 3, the video game zone, Johnny Eduardo.
Wow.
But for Kaue Fernandes, he's so interesting because you could bill him in all sorts of different ways. I could sell you a bit of a painting if you want, and I could say, Kaue Fernandes, he's a Muay Thai striker. And you go, okay, I'll believe it. I could also say, well, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Like, that does feature at the forefront of his game, and you go, wow, that's an abstract painting. But I can believe it as well. And that's the biggest thing that I found. You know, you talk about matchmaking and fighters coming in not on a ton of notice, or they come into unforeseen circumstances, and I could say, okay, well, look at Marnik Man when she made her UFC debut. It was too much too soon. Look at Muhammad Naimov when he came in to take on Jamie Mullarkey, and you're kind of fighting not just up the order, so to speak, but you're also going up a weight class to do it. And all of a sudden, Naimov with wins over not just Jamie Mullarkey, but Nathaniel Wood as well. Fernandez gets a big-time opportunity. His last time out with the LFA, he was a big underdog, taking on Felipe Douglas, who was 21-5 at the time. They get into a clinch situation. You think, geez, here's the opportunities for some big knees. Fernandez drops his left shoulder a little bit and throws a left head kick shin to chin, and he knocks out Felipe Douglas. So when I look at a guy like Fernandez, Matt, he's like the old Marc Diakiese. He's very exciting.
Exactly.
And people might really like him. And for Marc Diakiese, I don't know if he knows what he is anymore. Well, and he used to train. It was American top team. It was Great Britain top team with the man in the hat, not Chuck Mindenhall, but your guy, Brad Pickett. Marc Diakiese for this fight, training out of the Goat Shed, which has been a big gym recently in Southern Florida. But it's, what version of Diakiese do I get? And does Fernandez become automatically a star, or does he get dropped to the bottom of the roster?
It's like I've often said, I believed in Dante Exum. I still believe in Dante Exum, and luckily he has made it back to the league. But for Diakiese, it is hard to just kind of figure out where he belongs in the lightweight division, because he did have a lot of hype earlier on in his career, but you bring it up, only 7-7 in the UFC, which is a bit of a surprising record for a guy who has had as much shine as a fighter like Diakiese. But him being the opening fight on this fight card, I think does kind of tell you where his spot is in the UFC. But I'm glad you set it up this way, because it is true, right? Diakiese on a 2-fight losing streak, he still fought some pretty good fighters at 155 pounds in the UFC, win, lose, or draw, and guess what? He's got some good wins in the UFC too, and that's why I have a hard time with this matchup, because for Diakiese, we have seen a lot more of his wrestling develop as that UFC career has gone on. He was a lot more of that back foot counter striker heavy, where he'd throw those big missiles out of nowhere, and if he hit his target, they really wouldn't stand up to it. But Diakiese has had a game where it always has been focus on this one part and improve it, and then focus on another part and improve it. Remember when the answer to Marc Diakiese's game was elbows? He beat the brakes off Joe Duffy with elbows because, hey, it was an answer to help him deal with guys who tried to close the distance on the kicks and on his long-range punches. But I do think you bring up a really important question, because the improvements Diakiese's made in the wrestling, what is that taken away from in the rest of his game? Because I do still think he has some of those talents from the outside, but when you're not training those in the gym as consistently, I don't think we see Marc Diakiese being that kind of one-of-one special talent in the striking anymore. And that's where it's going to be interesting, because if he does just kind of stay on the back foot and try to go for some some of those long-range takedown attempts, because the thing about Diakiese is he can land takedowns from really far away. He's that fast at closing the distance, but he's not the best at chain wrestling after he hits the hips of his opponent. But if he's able to shoot in out of nowhere and hit the hips of Fernandez, for as good as the game of Fernandez is, his takedown defense isn't lights out. It's good. He can take for underhooks and he can defend takedowns. It's not 0%, but if Diakiese is able to really stifle him with some of that movement on the outside and just surprise him at getting in on the hips, I could see that being trouble for Fernandez if he just starts to throw up submissions off his back.
And Fernandez will find himself in that spot a lot in his fights. And for Marc Diakiese, again, Goat Shed Academy, you look at some of the training partners that are out there. I'm going to pepper a couple of names out there, but Shazaib Rind, a striking dynamo in Arturo Vergara, Luxbay Montalvian, and then 7-0 Combate bantamweight prospect at Lazaro Dayron. So look out for him. But the biggest part for Diakiese is where he spent a little bit of time at Goat Shed before going down to Brazil. Home gym was always Great Britain top team, but from the Instagrams, he's been training with 3-time Cage Warriors title challenger Jack Grant, as well as Scott Askham over there at Jack Grant's Combat Gym. And when you look at a guy like Fernandez, I mean, he's a bit of an oddball. He really is, because in terms of how often this guy's fighting, once per year from 2014 to 2019, he had a little bit of a find himself gap year in 2013. We all know what happened in 2020. We know what happened in 2020. And then he came back and he's fought once a year, 2021, 22, 23. So this is his second action of 2023 and just the first time in his pro career that he's fought twice in 1 year. But you go down through and you look at all of these finish wins. He's got 6 finish wins. 5 of those 6 are in the first round. And you look at the way that he's able to do it. I went back, I watched his fight against Luis Sardinha. And I think the reason why people might be a little bit down on Fernandez, even having this shiny record with only the 1 loss, you look at Sardinha. He beats Fernandez, and he hasn't fought since, which is a little weird for an undefeated fighter. Fernandez shot out of a cannon in the first round. And then in the second round, he can't get the takedown, and he looks completely wiped, and he tries to clinch a lot. And then in the third round, both guys are tired, but Fernandez is shooting from odd angles. He's trying to get the leg. He's trying to wrap up for a knee bar, for anything. He's getting dropped. He looked completely out of wind. He's looked great in those last 2 wins. He's been able to get finishes in the last 2. But this is my big problem for Fernandez. It's a lot of big actions on the feet. It's a lot of big actions for the takedowns. It's a lot of playing jiu-jitsu off his back. And 9 times out of 10, well, rather 8 times out of 9, he's been able to go out there and get the finish. But the 2 things that I want to really focus on for Fernandez, when he gets even an ounce tired, he becomes a completely different fighter. He becomes defensively liable. His hands drop big time, and he really does struggle at the end of that first round going into the second to the third. The other thing with Fernandez, there's a lot of big action, a lot of striking, a lot of waiting, and then planning and looking for the counter strike. He also does this weird thing to where he likes to feint a lot, and he ducks his left shoulder and his head in and drops his hands at the same time, and he's there to get hit.
And it's one of those weaknesses that I could see affecting him as he moves up the ranks in the UFC. The weird thing about this fight against Diakiese is, if Diakiese isn't that high of volume, though, I just don't know if he's going to make Fernandez pay for it, so that's something I'm going to be watching out for. But this is what I want to say about this fight, just as like a closing note. I kind of joke about this in the heavyweight division, right? You have the top 15. You've got like 3 guys outside the top 15. Then you have a group of anybody who could beat anybody on any given night, right? There's a lot of room beneath Marc Diakiese in the lightweight division, I believe, even though he is only 7-7 on a 2-fight losing streak. If Fernandez does lose this fight against Marc Diakiese, I think there's a ton of future opponents for him to get matched up with, to where it might not even be the worst thing for him long-term in his career if he does lose this fight to Diakiese, because it's one of those situations to where, and it's such a cliche at this point, you either win or you learn, and a loss to Diakiese I don't think sets you back to square one, right? It just proves that, hey, you're not ready for that step at that point.
Well, 8-1 is Fernandez. Combined opponent record for him 66-16, so it is pretty streaky that way. For Marc Diakiese, he is the favorite in the matchup. He was actually a heavy favorite when I had a look at this as I was writing my notes. The line has come down quite a bit. He's about a -154 is Diakiese on best fight odds. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprised to us as they are to you, Matt. I'm going to say over under. I think it's going to be close. I'm going to say 62.5% Diakiese.
I think it's going to be over, personally.
It's going to be over. It's slightly over. 1,186 total votes, 65% Diakiese, 85% by decision for the 35% that are Fernandez, 60% by decision, 27% by knockout. And we've seen Diakiese in those last 2 wins that he has. Vyacheslav Borshev, Old Slavo Claus, and Damir Hadzovic. 2 guys that only strike.
Well, and to piggyback off of your point of how Fernandez fights like a different guy in the third round, this is the only thing I want to say about Diakiese. He doesn't like getting hit. Like, he does fight like a different guy if he starts to take a lot of damage, to where he's not going to take the risk to try to win the fight. So I do think that's a point I want to bring up, because let's say Fernandez is able to hit him with some of those blitzes early on, and it makes Diakiese a much more hesitant fighter on the back foot, then Fernandez could definitely roll to a win, but you probably know from where he set the Tapology votes and where I placed them at, I do think the veteran knowledge of Marc Diakiese is going to be enough for him to get this win, but there's a reason I bring up the fact that there is a lot of room beneath Marc Diakiese for you to continue to grow. I don't think Fernandez is going to fight Jim Miller next, you know? So I do have Diakiese in this opening fight, but I think it's going to be a really fun one.
I do this quite a bit. I'm going Yago zone, and I'll pick Kaue Fernandes. You know, you want to make that sexy pick. I think Fernandez is going to be able to get it done, and we've seen Diakiese go out there. Think of his fight against Rafael Alves, where he finds himself in a submission. If he's out there and he's going for some of those takedowns, he could find himself caught, but he's training with a lot of great fighters at the Goat Shed in Florida, and as well with Jack Grant. And now, Octagon Zone, Scott Ashcombe. He's got a big fight coming up. So we're split on the pick in this one. Love to hear who you guys have. It's Brazil's Fernandez taking on England's own Marc Diakiese. Some big time fights in this card, Matt. The next one, it's in the strawweight division. Eduarda Moura, the debuting fighter, she's going to be taking on Montserrat Conejo Ruiz. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.